Most bankers aren't ready to help you until after their third cup of coffee. But with Central National Bank's after-hours service, you don't have to wait for the bank lobby to open to get help. You can contact us from 6 to 8:30 in the morning or from 5 to 10 in the evening, and we'll connect you to a real, live, local person who can answer questions and fix problems 7 days a week. Bank different. Bank Central. Central National Bank. Member FDIC.
This is a Rogue Media Network podcast.
Tom Farley is an advocate in the world of sobriety. He carries quite a message. Part of that message involves the fact that he's the brother of Chris Farley. His book, written in 2008, The Chris Farley Show, is an amazing read, and it talks about, from other people's perspective, exactly what Chris Farley was like in and out of addiction. I learned during this podcast that Chris was sober for 3 years and then went back out, relapsed, and ended up dying. After Chris passed away, Tom started to carry the message, but he did so while he was still drinking. Years into carrying that message, he got sober himself. And what happened to his life, it's just fascinating, and it's great. Tom works for Rosecrans Treatment Center in Chicago. He's very available, and he's just an incredible guy. He gets it. He gets his ability to carry his message, and this message is tied into his brother and his brother's story. And just an amazing guy. And I felt really connected to him because I feel like we have very similar family backgrounds. All right, so my man Tom Farley is coming up next. But first, Kevin Souza. Okay, so what was it like for you in college as far as drinking was concerned? Because the cool thing, I mean, there's so much fascinating stuff about your story, really. But,
yeah,
you know, because the connection with, you know, your family, and you cover all kinds of issues. And me too. I got two brothers who are sober, and my dad was a functional alcoholic, whatever you know,
yep,
if you want to use that term. And we were always around. You know, I'm the youngest of two boys. I know you're the oldest of four, and then your sister's above you, so you got five. So I feel like, you know, we're kindred spirits in a way, as far as like the family stuff is concerned.
totally.
Yeah. So when you're growing up, you have, I guess there's five of you. What is that like in the household?
It was, you know, it was chaos, but mostly because, like, I think my dad loved that. He loved to just whip everyone into frenzy, and he always wanted us all together. So we were always there. We always had to deal with each other. We had no other choice, and so we were always together. And Dad just loved he loved to like go out in public with his like look what I've created, and just whip us into a frenzy, and we would deliver. You know, it was just such a you know, show. You know, it was pretty. You know.
Well, you talked about it. You grew up in Madison, right?
Yep.
And you moved back home. You lived in New York for a long time. You moved around a little bit, but you're back home in Madison. And I heard you talk about one time, you know, when you go around, do people look at you? Hey, you're Chris Farley's brother, and how do you handle that? And you talked about the fact that you're really proud to be a Farley. I mean, you know, you guys were that family, and it sounds like your dad, and just like everybody else, he had his stuff, but he was very proud of you guys, and he was very positive. And it really sounds like you had a pretty good childhood.
Yeah, we did. And again, we had this kind of weird combination of my mother, this Boston Irish mother, and her side of the family. My grandfather was just nuts, just crazy. And my mom's the same way, you know. So we had this kind of fearlessness, you know, attached to our Irish humor from my mom. And my dad had like the real, you know, he was always funny. He was always kind of jovial. But my dad had this. The only way I can describe it is like, you know, like the light on the back porch where every moth is just attracted to it. My dad just, like, when friends would come over to pick me up to go out, and all of us to go out, you know, on the town at night, you know, they'd say, well, we got to say hi to your dad. We got to go in and say hi to your dad. So he just, like, in all our graduations, even the fathers of our friends would just, like, they'd swarm around Dad. He would just had this magnetism. And clearly Chris had that same thing. I think all of us have a little bit of it, but you definitely saw it the most in Chris, obviously, because but he always had people around him that just couldn't take their eyes off of, what's he going to do next? Dad was the genesis of that.
And you took more of a conventional route than your other brothers. They kind of ended up getting into improv, and you go to Georgetown. You're in sales, you're in marketing. Yep. But I was talked about this at the very beginning, and I got away from it. Your story is amazing because you got into this whole deal talking about Chris after the tragedy more than 20 years ago, and then you discover yourself after periods of being dry or whatever you want to call it that, hey, this is something that I need to look into myself about. And then now you're like on fire, continuing. You're still doing work as an advocate. You still work at Rosecrans, and you're doing a lot of speaking, and it's just more interesting than ever, I think, your story, and more compelling than ever. Part of that, we mentioned Georgetown. Was there drinking for you in college? Like, what was the partying like? What was the consumption like?
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, and I'm where I'm at now because now I kind of see everything's starting to make sense for the first time. And like the Georgetown thing, like I always had like this, I was the oldest son, so I had all the pressure to kind of do what my dad went to Georgetown, so I had to go to Georgetown. My dad went into business. He was a successful entrepreneur. He had his own business.
It was like an asphalt company, right?
Yeah. It was kind of, but it wasn't, it was just kind of, he had all these contracts throughout the state. Everyone just wanted to do, and it was just him and my grandfather before him, going up against these huge oil companies bidding for the county road paving business, and Dad would get it because they loved him, and I just had all this pressure. And the funny thing, I talked about like all these, like, all right, so I went down that road, and then I looked behind me, and like my next, and Chris was like, I'm going to be an actor. It's like, wait a minute. I didn't know that was an option. Like, what are you talking? Like, how does he get and then the rest of my brothers went, yeah, I think I want one. We're going to go with Chris on this one. And left me hanging,
Was there a lot of drinking among you guys growing up?
Well, yeah, I mean, but not that much. Well, the thing is, when we were growing up in Wisconsin, first of all, so we had this kind of a long history on both sides of the family of alcohol abuse. We had the family history thing going. We were Irish, so we felt we had to like live up to that standard. And we lived in Wisconsin, which is a train wreck of a city, state when it comes to
drinking
alcohol.
Yeah.
So we had all the boxes checked, and then back when we were growing up, the drinking age was 18. So which means we probably started at 16, maybe 17. Chris was actually later, in high school at the tail end. So but it wasn't that much. But then by the time I got to college, it just opened up, and I think Chris probably felt what I learned now about myself at Georgetown. He probably felt the same thing at Marquette. Is we're suddenly surrounded by all these really smart people. You come from Madison, Wisconsin, it's pretty even territory. But then all of a sudden, like I know for me, at Georgetown, I'm like,
well, you're in Madison and you go to Georgetown. You're the guy.
I'm absolutely.
And then it changes a little bit.
I mean, I just never felt like that whole imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. Man, I was deep in it.
Yeah.
I was deep. I'm like, I don't belong here. With these, like literally my senior year, all of my roommates, they're all CEOs. It's literally, and I'm like, okay, like,
Do you understand it more now that you're
that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I didn't know that at the time.
Yeah.
Why I was drinking, but I'm like, I look back, I'm like, that's what it was. It's like that self-doubt and fear. Now I can point it out clear as the day. I get it now.
What was it like for you? You're drinking. It sounds like you kind of have it under control in college, and or at least more so than your brother as he continues to evolve. You said he was a little later in the game, but what was it like for you to see him kind of take on a whole different light with the drinking and the using, or did he change it all?
No, no, it really wasn't. I mean, so after graduate, Chris was 2 years below me. And so after when I graduated, I just followed the crowd up to New York. We all went to New York. Like, okay, I'll do that too. Went into finance because all my buddies went.
Everybody else did, right? Just like, yeah, the
Yeah,
Wall Street
I
stuff.
did. Yeah, I did. Right, with Bear Stearns,
Uh-huh.
Citibank, did it all. And
How are you doing? Are you making some money? You're living in New York. I mean, life. I got to imagine life's pretty good, at least on the outside, right?
no, because I was just having to. First of all, when you live in the city
Yeah.
at that age, you're spending every dime because it's just so much. I was like, there's no saving there. It was like,
Okay.
yeah, it's 24/7. I was like, all right. And I was always kind of like looking to have fun. So, uh, yeah, it was always, there was always that balance between responsibility and I needed, what I said, I needed to have my fun. But what I was really doing was, um, really trying to manage all these emotions, in very unsafe and unhealthy ways.
Yeah.
I just felt like I unemployed, and so it really didn't allow me to live up to my potential. Because I was always trying to be something that I wasn't. I was always trying to be like like all my friends, these
Hmm.
financial, gurus and these, future titans of industry.
Well, it's like you
And
said, you follow the crowd
yep, and
up to New York.
yep. And
Yeah.
at the same token, I also wanted to kind of have my Midwestern family, because values, and grow that. So I got married, started having kids, and um, I thought that just being a good, loving father was enough that I was taking care of my family, and it wasn't. It's like, especially out in New York, no, you need to you need to work your ass off to support your family. Then the other stuff, hopefully, comes along, but and it's woven in there. But if you're not, you know, um, providing, I mean, and we did. I mean, I there was enough. It was I don't know. It was weird. It was just I just
Yeah. It sounds like there was stress around it because again, you're trying to you keep up with the Joneses, and sometimes you can end up, robbing Peter to pay Paul, and you've got all this emotion, right? That you're trying
Yeah,
to figure out.
and I get like everyone else. I would get the phone calls, at 5 o'clock. When are you coming home? These kids
Yeah.
drive me nuts. I'm like, okay. Even if I get on the train right now, I'm not home for an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Like so, but I would say, okay, okay, I'm gonna drop everything, and I would go home, and I would leave work at like 5:30, like I was in the Midwest, and everyone else in Wall Street was like, they just got started.
Yeah. Yeah. When you're looking at your brother and things are starting to come together for him, I guess, and he moves up to New York,
Yeah.
are you looking at him and are you like, man, he's got it a little easier than I do? Why is this guy comfortable in his own skin, or why is he able? Because that takes balls to go right into acting after you
Yeah.
graduate from Marquette.
Yeah, yeah, and he worked for Dad for like a summer, and then just said, this isn't my thing, and I'm gonna go down and do this." And yeah, it's amazing how fast it was. He just did it. Um, and you can, again, maybe in Chicago at Second City, you can do that. I think Chris and I both had this thing where we're going to put ourselves out there and show people what we thought they wanted to see, which we knew deep down wasn't really us. We could, I know, all these years, I'm like,
You're a people pleaser,
yeah,
like
and
me.
and
Yeah.
and that's hard. And
Yeah.
so we have to balance that out. Like I know now that when to balance that out, I need to step away and do some self-care, or just recharge in a very, but I, like Chris, for a long time I did it just the opposite way, which was to, numb myself, just to, just drink. And so that's what Chris was doing. And when he got to New York, he was doing that in Chicago, and you can get away with it in Chicago because, again, it's very normative behavior. Like, but when he got to New York and it was a real business, it stuck out, and I can see that he was struggling, at least with his job. He was going to start to kind of get, he was getting suspended from SNL, and like, you know, drinking related job loss was something I was very familiar with.
Yeah.
So I could see that with Chris. I'm like, man, you don't want to do this. You want to be like me,
And you were talking to him about this stuff because you
Yeah,
guys were both in New York, and so you're
and
pretty.
the family was out in Wisconsin. I mean, it was just him and I trying to, I was trying to help him.
Yeah.
But I was that before it was a term. I was his first responder, but not that I knew what that was, but as an older brother, I also felt as a first responder that I had to solve it.
Yeah.
I had to figure it out for him. And
welcome to One Star Rewind, a new podcast about those dreaded one-star reviews that every business owner hates to receive, but yet every customer loves to read. During this podcast, we will peel back that one-star review to better understand how it happened, when it happened, and what the business owner is doing after receiving that one-star review. This podcast will be about love, hate, and laughter. On One Star Rewind, we will meet with real business owners who will tell their stories and how they do rely on reviews for their business. Follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or download us at roguemedianetwork.com. Please subscribe, but only rate and review for not a one-star review. Join us each time for a new review and a new story.
Bros and heroes. Gonna tell you about bros and heroes. Gonna tell you about.
Hey, I'm Zach.
And I'm Mike.
And we have a fantastic new podcast to tell you about. Bros, Foes, and Heroes. It's the two of us looking into the world of comics, breaking down some characters that you may have never heard of, and some that are just absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah, so Zach comes up with a character each time, and I go into it just completely blind. I don't know who this person is or what their abilities are or anything, and basically I guess we kind of go over their origin story and just some of the ridiculous stuff that maybe, especially Golden Age stuff.
Oh, Golden Age stuff is always the best, and we will make sure to highlight all of the shenanigans and just absolute weirdness of everything.
Yeah, that's right. So subscribe today and follow us on Instagram at Bros, Foes, Heroes.
And if you don't, I know where you live. Not really, but please subscribe.
Bros and heroes.
What are we doing here, Rusty? What are we going to do?
Yep, we're doing the King of the Hill Rewatch Podcast.
King of the Hill Rewatch Podcast. Yeah, so we're going to go through one episode at a time. Come along for the ride with us.
Come check it out.
And give me a good like Dale Gribble quote to go out on.
Wingo!
Yeah, Wingo.
Wingo. All right, well, join us for the King of the Hill Rewatch Podcast.
Deep in the heart of Texas, that drinks his brew.
911, what's your emergency?
Do you hear that? It's coming from the house.
It's coming from inside the house? Do you mean? Could it be?
The Poltergeist. New from Rogue Media. Two haunted hotties talking about haunted places. Every episode we dive deep into the darkest places and give you a bit of history.
We're getting spooky in all the right places.
You've gobbled your last ghoul.
Follow along for the craziest and spookiest stories with Debbie's Dark Tourism. The Stanley Hotel,
Winchester House,
The Alamo,
Hotel Monte Vista,
and more spooky places. Find us at _Poltergals. POLTERGALS.
Look over your shoulder. It's us,
the Poltergals. Wherever you consume the podcast, you can find us there.
When you say a first responder, what do you mean by that?
Well, like in my family,
Yeah.
the rest of the family was out in New York.
Yeah, okay, that's cool.
And I'm like, it's just he and I in New York, and I'm like, hey, I think Chris is struggling. So, whether I wanted to or not, I was there, and I had to kind of, but I had so much going on myself too. It was hard.
You did such a great job in that book, The Chris Farley Show, which people can get out now. It's still on Amazon, and it's probably something really cool to get coming up towards the holidays. And it's educational. And then after that book, they can kind of dive back into more of what you're doing as far as being an advocate in the recovery circles today. Again, there's so many things, Tom, that come full circle in this whole story. I mean, when you're writing the Chris Farley show in 2008. You're not a finished product,
No.
not even close.
Not even close, yeah.
Yeah, and in that book you talk about you guys start to have like some interventions, and some of those interventions, you just remind me of my family so much. It's like we're drinking while we're intervening.
Well, we're talking about Chris's drinking problem. Like, we got to get our drink order in first. Yeah. It was like,
What was some of that? What were some of those instances like when you're trying to get Chris to stop, but you're newly married, you're an alcoholic too? Paint that picture for me. What's going on?
well, one of the things that I talk about a lot, and I didn't know, is that one of the things that we all throughout growing up, we had one coping mechanism, which was we had literally one emotion we used for everything.
Laughter.
Can you imagine what that was?
Yeah, laughter. Yeah.
The good side is, three of my brothers and now my son, who's out in LA, we got really good at it, and now they made a career out of it. But it was a coping mechanism that turned into a trauma, meaning like whenever somebody like fell and hurt themselves, we would laugh, not out of like because we were mean. We just thought our humor could bring them out of that, and clearly it couldn't. But we would use it for everything, and we never developed any other really emotions,
Yeah.
And so even in our interventions, it would always end up in laughter because we couldn't go there. We couldn't go to something serious like somebody in our family is in real danger here. We would, and not only that, we were also talking about Chris. So we would say, Chris, you do realize that, like last night you did this, and it was actually so funny that we would end up laughing. Like one night we were up north, one of these interventions, the night before, my dad started out with my dad waking up in the morning, going for his morning juice, and he poured juice out, and he got a screwdriver right in the kisser. And because Chris took the vodka bottle, poured it into the carton, and that's what and my dad like, what's going on here? And then he noticed like this bread and bologna trail, like Chris had tried to make a sandwich in the kitchen, and he followed it all the way to the bathroom, and that's where he found Chris on the floor of the bathroom, passed out.
Oh, gosh. Yeah.
With the rest of the sandwich on the table. Like, it was just like this breadcrumb thing. Where's Chris? Like, well, let's follow the sandwich. And so we were trying to like really talk about his drinking problem. But then we realized what he did. It was just like you couldn't not see the humor in it, but it was not the right time to be laughing, obviously.
Yeah.
But,
well, you guys didn't know what you were doing. And a lot of people, and that is part of what you're doing today and what a lot of us are trying to do, just getting the message out there, educating people. I mean, nobody knew what the hell to do then. Really. I mean, especially a family that you grew up, for my family, I know and my parents loved us to death, but I think there was a stigma for them, definitely, like, oh, my kids are screwed up, because of this. And I think they were a little embarrassed, they just didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know how to handle it. They didn't know. And it makes perfect sense to me that you're having interventions, during cocktail hour or whatever, and you're going to get a drink. But like looking back now, it's like that's as dysfunctional as it gets.
And I'll tell you one other thing that we always say about those interventions, there's always that when you're talking about somebody like Chris, like, we had this fear that we'd have to bring up our stuff too. And we didn't want to go there. We just wanted to talk about Chris's problem, but we weren't ready to go there ourselves. And to a certain extent, that is true. It's not about us. It's about this person that's really in need, but we couldn't help him as much as we wanted to. We couldn't be as honest as we wanted to because honesty meant maybe kind of talking about some of our issues on one side, and then the other thing is when you have somebody that is really has a problem in your family, you don't go to your issues. As long as Chris was around, the rest of us could tell ourselves, well, we're not that bad, so
Yeah.
I guess we're okay.
Uh-huh.
And I realized that the first time the couple times I tried to go to AA meetings, I could always look at somebody across the room. It's like, well, that person drinks more than me, or
Yeah.
that person takes drugs and they drink.
You
I
compare
don't.
yourself out. I compared myself out forever.
Yeah, that was my barometer,
Yeah.
and it was the wrong barometer. You know.
Yeah. Well, and you're comparing yourself to your brother. It's got to be an interesting situation. I have no idea what this is like. You know, here you are, you're drinking, you're struggling. You mentioned it. And then your brother he's like a shooting star. It's got to be almost like you can't even believe it, right? A surreal situation. You're both in the same city, and he's a rising star on Saturday Night Live.
Well, there's two things about that. First of all, that's one of the things that always annoyed me is I was trying so hard to have relationships, whether they're friends, girlfriends, whatever it is, and failing. You know, I was just trying everything I could, and then I'd look around, and Chris, this knucklehead behind me was just doing everything the opposite and making friends literally everywhere. It's so effortlessly. Like all my friends would be laughing at something Chris would do, and I would go, "Don't laugh. That's not funny." I mean, it was hysterical, but I didn't want to. I'm like, "Don't do that." It just. So there was that kind of resentment too that I was carrying around. That like, how does he do this?
Yeah.
But there was a really cool thing was when we did get to New York when he got an SNL. The beautiful thing about Chris is that for the most part, he never, that's why people love him, is because he never forgot that he was Chris from Wisconsin. And I remember the first time we went up to SNL when he was going to get the gig, and he called me. He's like, "Do you want to go to the show tonight? They're letting me stick around to go to the show." And we went up to the show for the first time. I'm at the show with Chris, who's just about to be hired, and we're like, we're looking at each other like, "Can you believe this?" We're like, and he doesn't understand that this is like the rest of it, like the next 5 years of his life, he's going to be embedded in this, and we're just like so, like, I can't believe we're at this show. Like, we just met all these people.
When did you notice that it was kind of getting out of control with him when he's on that stage? Because now it's a whole another story. When he's high profile now, and again, you're drinking, but you see him, he gets in trouble, suspended from SNL. That's a big deal because somebody like Chris has to get sober. People talk about it. It could end up in Page Six or something, and there's a lot of pressure to that. I can't imagine if people knew who the hell I was when I was in and out, you know?
I used to go to a lot of the after parties, and when we talk about that, like time to recharge and regroup or whatever it is. I would go to these after parties, and I would see just Chris like acting like he was in college at the the bar where all the rugby players would hang out. I'm like, dude, and they're like, and me being a kind of this New York business guy. I mean, my mind, as it always was in Georgia, I would always like, who's in the room, who's who and what's going on. And Chris didn't care about any of that stuff. He just was like, I need to unwind. I'm drinking, and I'm like, yeah, but like the CEO of the 3 studios are here. Like,
he didn't care.
Yeah, I'm like, and that just I'm like, dude, you gotta balance that. This is important to your career.
Yeah.
He didn't. I don't know. That's how I valued things and judged things. He didn't. But when at the point where I thought that he really should start paying attention to this, and he wasn't, I got a little afraid for him.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned in your book, and it's a poignant story, other people have talked about it as well, is that Chippendales skit with him and Patrick Swayze. Chris Rock says, that from that moment on, it changed Chris to the point where, because it was a fat joke, and I saw it as Chris being super comfortable in his skin, but some people didn't. And where do you come down on all that?
Well, it's interesting. It was the first time when Rock, when we interviewed him, and that was in the book. That was the first time it even dawned on me. I'm like, what is he talking about? Like, and my first thought was, first of all, that's Rock's, that's Chris's point of view. So I was just going to leave it in the book, and I wasn't going to refute it. I didn't want to be that like you're wrong. But I was like, okay, I'm gonna let him do that, and good thing I did. But my personally thought was like, are you kidding me? I've seen Chris do that same skit since he was 12 in the family living room. He
Yeah.
was always doing that. And when we were up, in college, I would see him in bars when the band would go on break, and we'd all go to the bar and we look back on the dance floor, and there's Chris by himself doing that exact same thing, and it was hysterical and funny, and like, I was a little pissed, that he was making a career. They're paying for him to do this. Like,
This isn't fair. Yeah.
this isn't.
Yeah.
He's not acting.
Uh-huh.
He's doing what he's always done, and so that's how I originally thought about it. And then when Rock said that, I went, I don't think he's right. And then a couple years later, as I got more into my stuff and understand, like, oh my God, he was 100% right.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of things that they did. Like there was, like, even when the last time he hosted, they made fun of his drinking, and his whole monologue was, I'm not going to get effed up tonight, and I found a script in some of his stuff years later. There was a skit that the writers wrote called The Relapse Guy. It was about this buddy of theirs that keeps going into relapsing, and that was funny to them apparently.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's so not funny anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so not funny anymore. And at the time, like, you say that idea, and with sense of humor, you're like, oh, that could be kind of funny. But then when we're talking about the person who has relapse, right? And it's like, and you talk about trauma and all that stuff, and it sucks, but like, there's got to be something. You're taking a hit, if you're in his shoes, I would imagine. Where did, as your family, your father, I've done some research on this, was a gregarious, charismatic man, but he was a big man. He was 600 pounds when he passed away.
Yeah.
And food was like love in your family, but it also sort of turned on you guys a little bit.
It was just like alcohol, I mean, we used it to manage our emotions, still do, so my dad getting to that size, obviously, and this was the thing, and I could see it now that I'm back in Wisconsin too. Like my father was this, Georgetown grad who went to he went to school with all these, like big, I mean, he went to, his classmates were like, Nino Scalia, who went on to be a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
He had another buddies that were CEOs. I mean, and he went back and he went to law school for a year at Wisconsin. He wanted to go into politics. He loved politics. And then my grandfather had a heart attack, so he took over the family business and he started to have kids, and he got married, and like, well, that dream's over. I gotta take care of my family. And he became this, took over this asphalt company where he was going into, these counties in Wisconsin, these small rural counties, where he'd meet with the county highway commission, who was made up of these gentlemen farmers that were, making, bids to, pave the county roads, and they loved him. But, here's this guy that had all these dreams, these Georgetown, ambitions, and now he's in, some small county in, having a, burger and
Comparing himself to other classmates and making history.
And his brother, my uncle, was vice chairman of Citicorp.
Oh,
so he
wow.
in New York, and and he was always, always getting compared. My grandmother was always talking about her banker sons. She had 3 sons that were, all my uncles were bankers, and Dad just took over the family business. And
isn't that interesting though? And do you notice that the more and more we get further down the road with recovery? I know this stuff with my father. I have light bulb moments. 10 years sober now, 11 years sober, and it's just like, oh, maybe my dad was feeling that way about that.
Right.
You know what I mean? Maybe he was coping with feeling less than, which, oh, by the way, is bullshit. He's raising a family. He's doing a great job. You know what I mean? But that you compare yourself to other people, and now you're eating as a coping mechanism. Was he a big drinker too?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
But the thing is, he was so big that I never saw him drunk.
Yeah.
But like every day or two, there'd be a new, Doer, the handle Doers, the big bottle,
Yeah.
emptied in the trash. And so, yeah, no, it was a lot. And it was just always out there. That's kind of what he did. But Universal, and that's one of the things you just couldn't understand with Chris. It's like, I don't get it. You know, I drink, but I take care of my career. It's like, Dad, you work for yourself. You walk in at 10 a.m. and no one's asking where you were.
Yeah. How much you talk about the pressure? It seems like you're typical alcoholic like me, a sensitive guy, and it seems like your brother was too. And how much did the pressure of you think SNL and that environment get to him, or lead to more drinking, eating, whatever you do to cope with that stuff?
Oh, all the time. Again, he had that imposter kind of syndrome thing too. And I remember him. I could never understand. He was Chris Farley. In a couple of years, like he was the guy, and people would say, "Your brother's so funny," or "Chris, you're so funny. We love you," and he just wouldn't believe it. Like, really? And now all these years later, I'm doing all these speeches and all these motivational talks, and people come up to me and it's like, "Oh my God, you helped me so much." I do a lot of speakers meeting at AA meetings. People are like, "Oh my God, that was amazing," and I'm like, "Was it?"
Yeah, well, I'm the same way, right? Yeah.
Oh no, it can't. No, okay,
Yeah.
I don't get it. And then all of a sudden, like, oh, that's what Chris was going. That's what Chris.
That's so interesting you say that. That's like one of those light bulbs for me right now. It doesn't matter what scale it's on. It's basically somebody saying you did a good job and you're not believing it, whether you're the star of Saturday Night Live or you just did a kick-ass job at a speakers meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all relative.
Yeah, when I talk about not having other emotions to go for, I remember the first time in recovery, somebody said, "Well, you should do a gratitude journal." And I'm like, all right. So I sit down and I'm like, write gratitude along the top of the page. And for the next hour, I was just staring at this blank page. And I finally went, really? Nothing? You're grateful for nothing? You can't come up with a single thing? And it's not that I wasn't grateful. It's just that I was thinking of gratitude in these grand terms. I'm grateful for
my Maserati or my huge car, like my huge house. Yeah,
grateful for my children that I love, and that's gratitude. Yeah, but you're missing all these little things that happen to you, like every second of the day, and you need to focus on those things.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I haven't kind of figured that out. I still struggle with that, but I'm working on it. But that's one of those things like, I'd rather just use humor if you don't mind. But,
well, none of us are finished products. You know what I'm saying? So that's the thing. Like, I want to be able to come up with this incredible gratitude list, or I want to be honest all the time, or I have this idea of this furnished person I'm supposed to be. And it's just not real, and like, that's the thing I learned in the rooms, and, take it easy on yourself, right? That's what I constantly am beating the shit out of myself on bad days. And I'm just like, take it easy on yourself, right? I mean, like things, like you, I want to get back into your story a little bit. You're talking all over, and you carry this message. You started after your brother died, the Chris Farley Foundation. And you talk about it like, you're a marketing, a sales guy. So you saw a need right away. When you say, I'm talking to these people, it's kind of like it's canned or whatever. So you dip into the improv pool yourself and you figure that's how I'm going to talk to people.
Well, that was my thing. I was going into schools because that's where kids were. And I looked around. I'm like, okay, all of these prevention programs are all information and knowledge based and education based, because that's who's delivering it, professional teachers. And like, but there's still a problem. So what are they missing? And I knew I had to use humor. So I knew I could use humor to get their attention. So at least, my brothers taught me, like, you've got to connect with your audience. So
you've got to connect with your audience. It's all about connection in so many ways.
Anything. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And then I said, like, well, how do they do it? They all they all went through Second City and learned improv. So I studied improv and I learned that it was developed this woman developed these exercises and games to reach inner city at-risk kids to teach them how to communicate better and form ensembles, form peer enhanced environments as opposed to peer pressure environments.
That's what started improv?
Yeah, it was a woman, Viola Spolin was working in Chicago at in like the Cabrini Green area, and she was trying to get kids to communicate better. And then then these comedians found it and made an art form out of it. But it started with great intentions, and for 25 years I've been trying to bring it back to that and just being the evangelist. Like this is how good it is.
Yeah,
and
that's amazing.
It's all about connection. And then in a post-COVID world, I'm like, now do you see it?
Yeah.
Now, how important connection is. The rest of the world suddenly knows what it feels like, and they couldn't handle it.
And so now,
months of COVID, there were starting fights in Walmart.
Yeah, because they felt the isolation, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of addicts, feel. Yeah,
I've always felt. Yep.
And part of your message continues, and then so you do the work, right? And whether you're drinking at the time, I know you had periods of sobriety where you just wouldn't drink, but you never were like sober, practicing a program or working on.
I thought that was enough. I'm like, but I would get 5 years. And yet I'm still creating these train wrecks. I'm losing jobs, getting divorced. I'm like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I'm sober.
Yeah.
Like, why is this? I don't get it.
Yeah. Did you ever go back? Because then, back to your brother and you're part of that. He gets, I guess, bottoms out somewhat in New York, or definitely does. And then he gets sober. I don't think enough people talk about this, and it shows how, this stuff works. He was sober for 3 years.
I love talking about that. There was some beautiful stories.
Dude, I had no idea till I started to do the research on you, and I feel like I knew a lot about your brother. I had no clue.
Well, that's what made him one of the funniest people around. Is because he was working his recovery program.
Yeah.
He was funny. The first couple of years on SNL, but when he came back from his second trip to treatment. And instead of going back to his big apartment on Riverside Drive, he went back to a sober living house in Lower Manhattan, on TV every weekend, but checking into his cot every night. And that's what made the difference. All of a sudden, boom, and for me, what I noticed was all right, he's dressing better, and he's,
yeah. But that's the beauty of it. And you're talking about it. I believe, just because it's my experience, the long-term recovery thing really works. Like, I went to a treatment center, and then afterwards I went to an extended care. Now, I was working at KFC. I wasn't on Saturday Night Live, so I can't even imagine what the hell that is like, But he did it. He had the humility.
In New York,
to
have this and then just say, no, I got a meeting at 9:00. I gotta go, and he would do it. And
for 3 years, dude. That's a long time. And,
so there's a great story I'd like to tell you at that time. So my son was born around that time, and he had born in New York hospital, and he had kind of a heart thing that he had to stay in the ER for like a week to fix it up. And so we went home. We had two girls, his two older sisters, and so we were coming back to the city to pick the kid up from the hospital. He's all better, and we asked Chris, like, can you watch the girls? And he was so thrilled that I had even asked him. It's like, yeah, I'll babysit for the afternoon. So we drive in from Westchester, where we live, get to his apartment, ring the doorbell, no answer. And we're there 5 minutes. I'm like, oh no, what happened? He was sober for a year and a half. Like we weren't I just had bad feeling. And then just when I for about 5, I look up the block, and around the corner comes Chris with these, under his arm are these 2 huge Barney dinosaur stuffed animals and grocery bags full of Cheetos, ice cream, the worst, best babysitter you can ever imagine, and all these Disney VHS movies. And he was like, I'm sorry I'm late. And he was just so happy that, and I think he knew that his sobriety gave him this gift of an afternoon.
It was providing him opportunities.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And then you're riding with him through the whole thing. I mean, what I love about your relationship with him is he continues to involve you. Clearly, he was like, over the moon about you. He has you come to his 3rd year anniversary.
Yeah.
And what was that like?
That was the same thing. Like, because we always had this kind of, he was always pushing people's buttons. He was always trying to, like, take me down a peg. He always thought I was too serious and too awesome. So he goes, yeah, can you come to my 3rd year anniversary? I'm like, I'd love to. Like, all right, give me, where's the address? And I start walking, I'm following this address, and I realize I'm looking deeper and deeper into the west side, and I realize I'm in the middle of Hell's Kitchen. My first thought was, oh, you jerk. I thought he'd give me some wrong address just to mess with me. But I found the address, and I went upstairs in this, like, looked like a bombed out building with every, like bum in the neighborhood, and there's Chris in the front of the room with his little blazer on, and he's telling this room full of people, like, I'm no different from you. And I'm in the back room going, yeah, you're a little different, dude. Man. And he's so serious. He's like, no, I woke up this morning. I prayed that I was going to be sober today. And here we are at the end of the day. We did it. And we get, like, coffee and cake as the payoff. Like, this, isn't life great? And I'm like, who is this guy? It was like the first time I saw Chris, like, totally in recovery and working this program, and I knew he was always kind of being there for other people, but this is where he met every day for his AA meetings. Like he's on SNL and he's going to Hell's Kitchen for these meetings. I'm like, okay.
What was the support for? Like, were your parents just over the moon? Your sister and your brothers, were they like, wow, this is very, very special?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, really?
At all. No, I don't think we really got it. At least, we were just, I think my parents were just happy that, he was going to keep his job and he was not being, destructive to himself anymore. But I mean, I remember this was before that when we first got, like, into recovery. I remember Christmas time. It's vivid in my mind. It's I feel bad about it, but I remember Christmas Eve where, we usually, we open our presents and, start having brandies and, up all night joking around. And I remember this one particular one when Chris was out of treatment and we're all doing the same thing. And I vividly see this picture of Chris sitting amongst us with his mug of coffee, just trying to be sober in this place where he should have felt, trusted and accepted. Trusting, and we, because we thought, that's Chris's problem. It's not ours.
And yeah.
It was hard. It's hard. I think I wouldn't say we never got it, but we were certainly slow to get it. And we didn't change our behaviors at all. My mom did. She was the first one, even before Chris. She's been sober now almost 30 years. And, the way that she kind of did it was, I'm going to be the model. And, she didn't, didn't require anything from us. She just was going to be sober. I need to do this for myself. And if you see that and value it, okay. But if you don't, I can't make you. And it took all of us years.
Yeah, it takes what it takes, and sometimes, unfortunately, in your brother's case, it doesn't. Yeah. And I wanted to get your insight a little bit on this because, again, you go to that meeting for his 3 years, and you're not sober, but you're supportive. I mean, you're there in person, and you're rooting them on, even if you don't get it. But then, Tom, you kind of witness, and I think it's interesting for people to see this, and it's a warning sign for, I don't know, people who are out there and still drinking and using and maybe listen to this, or people who have family members or friends affected by this. You witness the anatomy of a relapse, really. He's very successful on Saturday Night Live. He's sober. And then what happens?
Well, I was there, unfortunately, for that one, too. So he had gotten through SNL and he started going out. He made Tommy Boy and went out to L.A. because he was going to make movies now. And he came back a year later, and he was making. He had a 2-movie deal for him and David to make 2 movies. Tommy was so successful, and he wanted to start going on his career.
Yeah.
But David said, "No, I need. You're going to always have movies. I need you to make this movie. I need the second. So they fast tracked Black Sheep.
We're talking about David Spade, obviously, for people that don't know.
Yeah, with David Spade, and so the two of them they did it, but it was just really they just wanted to get it,
We hear this all the time. If you even peek into show business, like the 2-3 picture deals where the last couple are just rushed, and yeah.
And Chris knew it. He called me, came back to the city. It's like, yeah, they're doing a sneak. We're almost done. We got a couple endings we're looking at. We're doing a sneak preview at a movie theater. They used to do these, live audience, and he goes, we're going to sit in the back and just kind of see the reaction. So he picked me up. Or I went down to his hotel room in the city, and we took a limo out to Jersey to this theater. But so Chris knew it was not his best work, and he's at this thing, and like all of these like big heavy duty studio people are there, his manager's there, and it was just David and I, and in this hotel room before, he's like going to the mini bar, like picking up all these bottles and putting them in his pocket, and I'm like, what? He's been sober 3 years. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? He goes, the limo driver likes, when we go to the movie, I just give him a couple of these. They like, they kind of spend the time. It didn't even dawn on me. You're giving your limo driver for booze. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm like,
I just thought of that too. Yeah.
I didn't. Well, I didn't at the time.
Yeah.
I was like,
but you bought it. You're his brother. You're kind of like, oh, okay.
He was 3 years sober. I thought, that's all it was.
Yeah.
You're
that's it. You're good.
You got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we go to the movie, and it's just, Chris wasn't happy, and he was doing weird things. Like he goes, I gotta go to the bathroom. And I go, yeah, I do too. So I go back to this bathroom, and it's just like this one room, just one stall thing. And I followed him, and he goes, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm going to the bathroom. We've done this since we were 10.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Like, why not? We can go to the bathroom at the same time. And he goes, no, I need my privacy. I'm like, that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
So he was doing those things. And I'm like, finally I go, I'm going home. All right, I'm out of here. And I get this call from my father the next morning. He's like, what happened last night? I'm like, I don't know. The movie was okay. I'm like, Chris trashes his hotel room, and he's in trouble and all. And, he's typical Irish, it was my fault because I was, the last one there.
I love how tight your family is, by the way. I mean, the fact that your father is somehow involved in that. I mean, he's got this superstar, and you're this established guy, like professional, and here dad's calling you saying, what did you do?
Yeah. Oh yeah. My dad was never so much involved in, like you would see, these parent managers of stars. He just wanted the family dynamic to kind of be what it is.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Yeah, he wants everybody safe and everybody to get along.
Yeah, managing any careers, but he was being a dad. He was managing us.
And one of the things I love about your brother, hearing this, and I love about you really respected and loved your parents, and you wanted their love too. And you talk about towards, the devastating night where Chris ends up, passing away and dying is, you guys go out for dinner, and he's back, I guess, in Chicago, and he's going to see your parents. And there's like a little bit of, he knows he's not sober. And there's a little bit of anxiety around that. What happens that night at that dinner, and take us through that.
Well, I wasn't there. That was my brothers, Kevin and Johnny. They were, and because I had my family out in Connecticut. We had our own thing. I wasn't.
So they were in Chicago. Okay, yeah.
And a lot of our Chicago buddies were there. It was they went to, Gibson's, and you had a big steak, and they were doing all the stuff, and then like everything with Chris, you start to peel off, like I'm out, like in my book, one of our buddies described Chris, and really it's true for all of us, is, the first hour drinking, with Chris is fun. The second hour is the best time of your friggin' life. The next 5 hours though are brutal. And that's where, Chris, none of us have an off switch.
Yeah.
And so after that dinner, it was all fun, and that was that second hour. But all of a sudden, it was just my brother Johnny was like, I need my rest. I got to go. And that's when Chris just found, just the bad people. And
yeah.
He was dragged around from party to party. Look, we got Chris Farley. And we were like, and it just ended up.
And your brother probably, I mean, people got to rest, people got to sleep. Like it's bigger than us. You can't stop that freight train at some point, right? I mean, so then you live in the wake of this tragic situation, but I do love how you say your brother he's alive. He's almost as alive as he's ever been. And
well, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the book with that, because if I wrote the book, I would have at that time, I would have had a different, I would have talked about some of my, resentments and this is how I remember Chris, and that would just been about my relationship with it. But instead, we interviewed all these friends from him growing up to, summer camp, to Marquette, to Second City, SNL, Hollywood. And I was amazed when I kind of pulled it all together. I'm like, oh, wow, all these different people, they totally got Chris. I'm like, oh, you're right. You know what? He, like with Rock, I'm like, he had a better perspective than I did.
Yeah.
And I like to say that I have a better relationship with Chris now than I ever did when he was alive, because I can give up some of those resentments. I have empathy for some of his, his behaviors, and I understand some of his traumas that he carried around, because I carry around some of the same exact things. It's funny. I've always gotten asked the question, "What do you miss most?" And for years, I used to say, what I miss most about Chris is the big bear hug he used to give me, when we hadn't seen each other, and he'd walk in the door, "Hey, Tommy," and it was just so physical and genuine and just lingering. And I always remember that, and I totally miss that the most. But now when people ask me that question, what do you miss most about Chris? I honestly say I would have loved to have been in recovery with Chris. I think we would have really helped each other, if not, learned some things. It would have been amazing, because I love my life in recovery, and I think I would have loved it with Chris too.
Yeah, you give me a lot of gratitude, because I mentioned that my brothers are both sober. They're older than me, and sometimes we are amazed. We're like, this is unbelievable. The odds are not in our favor for that to happen. So I appreciate you saying that. It makes me treasure it even more. And so I won't keep you forever. I want to wrap up with your story a little bit, because I think it's pretty amazing. I mean, you're talking at these schools like we talked about earlier. You're using this improv to connect with these kids. And then at some point, Tom, you're like, I got to get on the bus. And not just like, hey, I got to not drink. I've got to get involved, because I've got all this other shit. We don't even really notice it until, at least I didn't, until I got sober. I mean, to stop drinking for me was a huge deal. It was monumental, right? And then I'm sitting in a rehab, and I'm like, oh, wow. And stuff starts to come up, and, they're just literally like, I'm thawing out there. But then the real work starts. How did that work out for you? How did you find recovery, like a 12-step that you work today? And what was that journey like? And I'll ask you a couple things after that.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, I had done this, 5 years, and then I would 5 years, then I would tell myself, well, I can have, I'm Irish, so I can have one Guinness on St. Patrick's Day. And, that's what my mind would tell me. And within, months, I was back on varsity. I was like, what happened? And I would do that for an extended period. And then I'm like, I would, have a lot of other train wrecks and broken relationships. And I'm like, okay, this isn't working for me. I'm going to be sober again. I did that again and again. And then this last time, again, I'm getting old. I'm smart enough to know that I'm making dumb decisions. I'm like spending more time leaving a party, like thinking about what back roads I'm going to go home on to avoid, detection. And I'm like, I'm smart enough to know that this is really dumb.
Yeah.
So it's you get it, and it's I don't know. I think a lot of it has to do with just there are a lot of similarities.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're getting my story, but I certainly get yours.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you saying that. Go back. I wanted to bust your chops a little bit. So you talked about this time was different. You were able to get into it.
So this last time, I'm like, okay, I'm doing stupid things, and I'm getting old, and this is stupid. And so I stopped drinking again. And I was like 4 months into it, and a friend of mine called me, who I now work with actually, that I'd done a lot of work with back in the day. I hadn't seen her in a while, and this was before COVID. She goes, "Hey, I just call me. How you doing?" I'm like, I proudly tell her I haven't had a drink in 4 months, and she goes, "That's great." She goes, "Why don't we have coffee? I'd love to reconnect with you." I said, "I'd love to have coffee with you." She goes, "Great. Well, why don't you meet me Saturday morning, 9 o'clock in the basement of the Presbyterian Church?" I'm like, "Okay,
Gotcha.
okay,
Yeah.
here we go." And like, but it was the right person of the right. This is somebody that I had total trust and acceptance, and I'd done so much work with her. I saw how many people she'd helped, and like we'd say in improv, I said yes to it. I said yes, I will do that, and I went. And it wasn't pretty. It's I had an audience and attention, and I tried to be funny, and I didn't get the response I usually get with some of my humor. Like, read chapter 5. I'm like, I'll do it, and I'll do it in a British accent. And people are like, okay, yeah, funny guy. And I'm like, this is funny stuff. I'm giving you my best stuff here.
Yeah.
I just started just shut up and listen. And and that's when I realized that it wasn't about being sober. I wasn't pointing out who's drinking more than me. I started saying, "Oh, I think like that person." Like when somebody would share, I'm like, "Oh, I did that." I'm like, it wasn't about sobriety. I realized was giving me the clarity to deal on the stuff that really was important. All this trauma and the issues. So that's when I'm like, that's what this is about. Okay, I'm in. This is my. I feel totally connected to this group.
How did that change your message? Now you're this person who's maybe feeling that light turn on, right? Like you're feeling filled, and you're going out and you're talking to people.
A lot of things. Everything would hit me at once. So right after that, COVID started, and I started doing a lot of webinars with Hazleton, which I had done a lot of stuff with, and Chris went there and was very successful there. And we were doing these webinars, and I would tell my story and Chris's story, the whole thing. And the more I talked about, we were talking about the coming storm, like, there was an epidemic before the pandemic, so it's going to be worse when we get down. There's going to be people living the pandemic with behaviors they didn't have going in. So we were talking about it, and I was talking about connection, the importance of connection. The more I talked, the more I talked about what's coming after COVID. I'm like, I've been talking about this for 25 years. I need to do something more. I need to get people into treatment. People are going to need not only, what I can bring in this attention and messaging and get, attention like the Farleys have always been able to do, Chris more than any of us. You really can't ignore us. So, and use that to a positive end and get people in treatment. So I hooked up with Rosecrans and I said, I can help people. I can kind of deliver this message. So it's getting people into finally not just talking about, but getting people into treatment. I still go in and talk to kids about motivational stuff and the importance of connection. But the third thing I think was important that I didn't realize how important was the need to have people in the treatment field that are also in recovery. There's not as many as you think.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of clinicians, a lot of people that know the science of addiction, but you have to marry that with how we think. You have to understand that more than anything, and then you can really help people. But I think there's some positive movement in that direction too.
What do you think? A couple more things. What do you think people can do? And this is just, I want to dip into this because you're, another alcoholic and you've been around this. Headed into the holidays, if somebody's listening to this, headed into Christmas, and they're just sober, how do people navigate that? How would you tell a sponsee to navigate that? I mean, there's different situations for everybody, but overall, do you have any helpful hints or anything?
Well, this is where that recovery kind of really connected what I've been talking about all these years about ensembles and improv. All of a sudden, I felt like I talked about it, but I honestly, when people say, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I'm like, I don't know, just I don't know. I gave some answer, but now I'm in this recovery community. I'm like feeling what it feels like to be trusted and accepted, and feeling deep belonging. I'm like, this is it. And now I tell people, like, this is your foundation, your touch point, but it's not all about staying in the recovery community. Life is still happening out there. So you can go out into the world, you can go to a holiday party at your work and stuff like that. But as soon as you don't feel that this is a trusted, accepting environment, like you feel when you're in a meeting, if you don't feel that, you have two choices. You can either leave, find a different environment, leave, or you can stay there if you have to be there, if it's for work or whatever it is. You can stay there, but you got to tell yourself, this isn't my ensemble. I don't need to impress these people. I just need to be here. And I need to be my authentic self. And it's not about, all this other stuff. Just, again, be yourself, be authentic, be easy on yourself, or leave.
Yeah.
But you don't have to go through the grinder like we always did in those situations.
I'm happy I asked that question. Last thing, your family, you told a story. I think I read it or I heard it where, you reminded me of my dad a little bit. My dad was like, we don't even know. There were times where my dad didn't drink. We don't even know because he was always the same guy because he never went to meetings or anything. He was just dry. And you talked about you're out to dinner with one of your daughters and there's something going on with the waiter. Right. Tell that story real quick. But I mean, because I think that is sobriety to me.
It is. There's two things I'll tell you. So, yeah. And I didn't, because again, I was so externally focused on my relationships that when I started working my program, then I'm like, it's just like, control things, the whole serenity prayer. I'm like, yeah, people don't understand how integral that is to, everything. And so there was a lull in COVID. And so restaurants opened up again. They're like, yeah, it's over. And, it wasn't, but we went. And she came in from New York to visit. And the guy the maitre d' met us at the door. And it's like, well, we don't have menus. You order on your phone. And then somebody will, we don't have waiters. Somebody will just bring your food out. I'm like, cool. And then I got really old man. So I'm like, all right, I got a question. Like, if I'm on my phone ordering my lunch and she's ordering her, but I want to pay for both, how does that happen? And he's like, well, if you do need a menu, I'm like, no, I didn't say that. I don't want a menu. I got this. I want to, I like technology. And I just want to, and I go, you know what? I caught myself. I go, you know what? We'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. Well, whatever it is. Even if I've got to put this credit card into your phone, we got it. I'm sorry. And I go back and she pauses and she goes, and I was completely overly nice to the guy.
This is your daughter.
Yeah, no, to the maitre d'.
Yeah, okay.
So my daughter looks at me and she pauses and she goes, do you know, Dad, like when we were growing up, you would have those moments and we all knew just to stay away the rest of the day.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? Yeah, the smallest thing, but you would just carry that with you, and every other little thing that happened on the day got a piece of that shit that you were carrying with you the rest of the day. So we avoided you. And she goes, to see you catch yourself like that and be nice to that guy was pretty amazing. But then, then right after that, because then I looked at her and I go like, I'm really sorry. I want to be present here. This is about us. I didn't want that thing. She goes, you never apologized before.
Yeah.
It's like you would just do that. And what I realized is what I was watching was a relationship healing. Like, then I had but I'm not actively trying to do that. I'm just trying to be my best self and my authentic self and work my recovery. And in the process, people, I see this not just my daughters, and my kids, but I started attracting people.
Mm-hmm.
And so and in this case, a strained relationship was healing before my eyes. Just me being myself, who she always wanted to see that.
And we appreciate people for saying stuff like that because, maybe you don't pick up on that if she doesn't mention that, you just kind of blow by it. Like there is a change happening in us and outside of us if we're working this deal. And the people closest to us know how we're doing.
Yeah.
You know, they know, they see it more than anybody.
Yeah, and you know, and she even see that with their mother, with my ex-wife. You know, like I'm not a threat to her anymore. I'm not like this. You know, we have the best relationship in the world, and because maybe not in the world.
Yeah.
But we're fine now because I don't care. And somebody asked me about what's the difference between recovery and long-term recovery. I'm like, well, I don't know. But if I have to answer it, I would say this. When I first got divorced, and somebody asked me, why did you get divorced? I used to say, because my wife didn't respect me. She didn't have my back. She didn't, didn't support me, blah, 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 blah. Then I got into recovery and I started answering like, well, that same question I would say, well, if I'm being honest, I didn't respect her either. I didn't, support her. I should, we really weren't there for each other. And then a few more years into recovery, when somebody asked me that, I'm like, to be honest, I wasn't very supportive and wasn't very respectful. Period.
Yeah.
There's nothing with her. And people are like, and that's, just living that example and across the board on everything in every relationship. It's like it's not about them, dude. It's about like you.
Yeah.
Just fix your stuff and hopefully those other people will, you're not a threat to them and they'll come around. They'll maybe that relationship will be repaired too over time on their time frame, because they control what they control. And if it doesn't, it doesn't. But just drive your own car.
It's healing when that stuff comes out of your mouth. It's just like the truth. Like maybe I wasn't supportive. Just like owning it. For me, that's huge because I have a problem even in sobriety, right? Getting to that truth, whatever I want to tell you to impress you. Tom,
I gotta hear myself say that all the time.
Yeah. You're the best, dude. I cannot thank you enough for this. I really appreciate it.
It's fun.
Yeah.
Thanks for all you do, Pete. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thanks for carrying the message. And I just think it kicks ass that you're able to be a light for change and you keep moving around out there. So thank you very much, and thanks for the time.
Thanks so much.
You got it, man. Take care, bud. See ya.
Later. Yep. See ya.
Thanks so much for listening to The Payoff with Pete. Once again, I'm Pete Souza. And of course, we are part of the Rogue Media Network. All kinds of good podcasts you can find at roguemedianetwork.com. And of course, you can find this podcast and all those other ones wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, other spots like that.
This has been a Rogue Media Network production.